The refreshment lady was making her way to the train.
Bake me a fucking loaf of bread,
Said Peter Sam.
couple of corn muffins, jelly donut, I don't give a shit. I'm in the market for quality baked goods.
Now, I am a big fan of Season 6. I personally love the season and have many fond memories of it as a kid, but many fans don't feel the same way as I do. Season 6 seems to be one of those seasons where you either like it or just dislike it. I haven't really noticed anybody in between. So today, let's take a look at one of its episodes that wasn't the strongest, recognizing the episode's good parts and its obvious bad parts. So let's rewatch Edward the Very Useful Engine, an episode I used to love as a kid. We'll be watching the UK dub, of course. Michael Angelis was just fantastic in this season. So the episode starts off with the typical Season 6 introductory fluff.
The engines on the island of Sodor are good at different things.
A big reason as to why fans dislike this season, and I understand that. The fluff is not needed, but even so, I enjoy seeing the Season 6 visuals, the engines, and their rolling stock, as well as hearing Season 6's music.
When engines have heavy loads, Edward buffers up behind and helps push.
Now, one thing I want to point out is that I do enjoy the idea of Edward always being a back engine to help others up Gordon's Hill. It makes sense. He's having a rest at Wellsworth Station, and an engine comes through in need of help, just like James did in Season 2's Donald and Douglas. So the episode states that because Edward is old, it makes the others think he is unreliable. This is not a brand new idea.
But Edward is old. Some engines think this makes him unreliable.
We then see the big engines at Tidmouth Sheds, mainly Gordon, saying Edward is useless and should be taken out of service. But of course, Henry and James agreed. So this is a big problem of that people have with the episode, including myself.
Means taken out of service. And not a moment too soon, said Gordon. And the other big engines agreed with him.
The idea of Edward being unreliable and too old is just not new, as he already defeated these claims during the episode of Edward's exploit. The three big engines were at Knapford Station when Edward departed with the heavy passenger train, and they were at the sheds later that night when Edward returned triumphantly. So essentially, this episode has the big engines out of character and basically going backwards within their character progressions, basically for the sake of making this episode, which was not a good idea. So Sir Topham Hatt forms a plan to prove the other engines wrong and sends Edward to work with Stepney. Now we are at Knapford Station, and I don't understand where this hate for Edward is coming from, as all the engines at Knapford Station are happy to hear Duck is replacing Edward.
When the other engines heard Duck was going to help them, they were pleased. Duck is very reliable.
I will say though, seeing Edward work with Stepney on these Season 6 sets is pretty great. So Duck comes to a stop on Gordon's Hill, only pulling 6 trucks. I do think it was a bad idea to have Duck replace Edward, as it's well known from Duck's introduction that he is a very strong and capable tank engine. So Duck being unable to handle 6 trucks is just a bit silly.
Halfway up Gordon's Hill, his wheels stopped altogether. Duck was stuck.
Now what's even more silly is that Duck was traveling on the same line as Gordon's Express, a big issue that would always happen in the CGI series. A big example, Toad's Adventure. I hate this.
It's too late to switch Gordon to the middle line, said the signalman. You'll have to flag him down.
So Gordon slows down and tries to push Duck as well as pull the Express. This of course fails, and so none other than Edward is called to come and be a back engine. Now I do love the idea of a back engine pushing 2 trains from behind.
Edward cheerfully buffered up, and the strange train set off.
This concept reminds me of the Railway series story, Super Rescue. So the 3 engines arrive at Knapford Station.
Look at that, laughed the boy. The back engine must be the strongest and the best.
Sir Topham Hatt then scolds Gordon, and rightfully so.
He proved today that he is useful, reliable, and very helpful.
Gordon then apologizes to Edward. So apparently, Sir Topham Hatt's plan was a success, which was to end talks of Edward retiring.
The Fat Controller's plan had worked. There was no more talk about Edward retiring.
This, of course, is another problem of that fans have with the episode. I don't really understand Sir Topham Hatt's plan. If he wanted to bring in another engine to do Edward's work, bringing in Duck, a very strong and capable tank engine, like I said, is not the best idea. Especially if he wanted the other engine to fail, because it's not like Sir Topham Hatt can predict that Duck will get stuck on Gordon's Hill. It would have been better if he had brought in a much weaker engine than Duck, knowing they cannot handle the workload. But this also would have worked better if Sir Topham Hatt specifically ordered Duck to stop on Gordon's Hill, and on the same line as Gordon's Express. But this also is just a dangerous and not very responsible idea from the Fat Controller, as you're risking an accident involving the Express. But yeah, that's the episode. The episode's goal was to show that Edward will always be reliable and very useful, no matter how old he is or no matter what the other engines think. The problem is how it went about showing this. There's many other ways to show that Edward will always be underestimated, rather than having the engines progress backwards and talk bad about him behind his back. They also did this in Harvey to the Rescue. Even Edward is seen talking bad about Harvey. I love Season 6, but even I will admit that that is not a good look. And not to mention, the Fat Controller's plan is just very confusing to the average viewer. I definitely don't enjoy this episode like I did as a kid. Even so, I still love Season 6, but I can easily recognize and agree with its glaring issues. I love many of the visuals within this episode though, so I'm glad I could walk away with a few positives from this rewatch. And of course, I am a big Edward fan, and I can find positives within any Season 6 episode. Anyways, that was my review and rewatch of Edward the Very Useful Engine. Let me know if you want to see more videos like this one down below.